Hi, my name is John Brega. I was born in Springfield, Massachusetts in 1921. After high school, I went to work for a trucking company, and after a couple of years, I found myself as the manager of their local office. Well, I didn't like that very much. World War II started, so I went to work for the Springfield Armory. I was a barrel rifler, putting the grooves in the 50 caliber machine guns. As soon as the Navy dropped the requirement for college graduates to join the V5 program, I enlisted in the Navy. I was sworn into the Navy on the stage of the Capitol Theater in Springfield with a bunch of other Navy enlistees. I went down to Emmitsburg, Maryland, to Mount St. Mary's College for my CPT training. That was civilian pilot training, where we flew Piper Cubs. From Emmitsburg, after 3 months or so, we went to West Virginia, where we flew another type of Piper Cub. Then from there, we really became Navy people. We went to Bunker Hill, Indiana, the Naval Air Station there, where we flew biplanes, the N2S. What a treat. A real thrill flying that airplane. Made you feel like a World War I pilot with a scarf flying off. From there, down to Pensacola, Florida, where after many months, we received our wings, our Navy wings, and were sent to Opelika, Florida, where we started to train in a torpedo bomber, the TBM Avenger. That was a treat, too. It was kind of fun, especially soloing in that monster. It was the heaviest single-engine airplane that was used during World War II. Got our wings. Oh, I already did that. Then from Opelika, we went to Great Lakes in Chicago, where we did our 8 landings aboard a barge on Lake Michigan. Well, we passed that all right. One fellow did go in the drink, but he didn't wash out because of it, and he turned out all right. From there, we went to a brand new squadron being formed at Martha's Vineyard. Tough duty, care of the Fleet Post Office, and trained with the squadron for I don't know how many weeks. And we went on down to Norfolk, Virginia, where we trained some more. And we finally were assigned a ship, but just for the shakedown cruise, which was kind of fun. We went down to Trinidad, then through the canal to San Francisco, where we waited and waited for a ride to our next assignment. We finally were put on the Bunker Hill. It was all repaired. And they took us to Pearl Harbor. From Pearl, we went to one of the islands, Maui, where we trained and waited for a carrier assignment. This was right about 1945. So it was getting pretty far along in the war. Finally, we were assigned to the Ticonderoga, the Big T we called it. And we went on through the South Pacific. We had a few strikes on some islands. Finally, we were bombing Tokyo and Honshu. 2 days before the war ended, we were on a strike in Tokyo, and well, I guess what happened was we were joining up, our squadron was joining up after the strike, and the anti-aircraft fire was kind of heavy, and apparently my plane was jarred from the anti-aircraft fire, and I ended up right in front of the fellow behind me, and the next thing I heard was, 306, your tail's gone, you better jump. I was in a flat spin. So I told my crewman, let's jump. And we jumped out of the plane, parachuted down, landed in the water in Tokyo Bay. Three of us separate, but we swam and joined up our rafts, tied them together, and immediately covered ourselves up with the blue side of this tarp so that we would look like the water. Because just off to one side, somewhere there was a Japanese airfield where planes kept taking off and landing. So we wanted to be as invisible as possible. Finally, we were in the water about 5.5 hours, along with the dolphins. That's one thing I really remember, dolphins swimming right by us all the time. And then we heard a welcome sound, a PBY Catalina flying boat landed, taxied by us, then came back and stopped and picked us up. In the meanwhile, some Japanese ship off in the distance, I don't know how far it was away, started heading toward us because they knew someone was in the water, and they were firing. It sounded like 5-inch guns at the PBY Catalina. Well, they were landing pretty close, and they were pulling us into the plane. It was pretty hectic. Finally, we were all pulled aboard, and we were taken to Iwo Jima, where they put us in a hospital to check us out. And while we were in the hospital, the good news came. The war was over. So our next step was, let's get back to the ship. And we finally got a ride on a destroyer back to the fleet. When we got back to the fleet, we pulled alongside of the destroyer, and we were transported one at a time by bosun's chair, a cable strung between the two ships. And we went over one at a time. So we were finally back with our buddies. It was pretty interesting. From there, we had we did get liberty in Tokyo. I went ashore as an MP one day. It wasn't really very much to see there. It was pretty desolate. And they weren't too happy to see us, but we got along all right. Especially on the trains. They had these trains between Yokohama and Tokyo, and we didn't get very close to the people. After a couple more training flights, we headed on home.
John, I see you have a Navy Cross. Can you tell us how you got that?
Well, the Navy Cross was awarded to me and several members of the air group for sinking the battleship Curie in Tokyo Bay. Well, the war was over and we were heading on home. I had to leave the squadron. My father was very ill, so I flew home. And then got back together with him in Seattle. And after a week or so, took the train home and to Boston and was discharged. I guess that's the big war story. One thing, our instructor at Miami, when we first started flying torpedo bombers, was George Gay, who was the sole survivor of Torpedo Squadron 8 in the Battle of Midway. He was quite a character. He just died a few years ago. He became an airline pilot for United Airlines. And we did lose in our squadron. There was about, I think, 20 or 25 pilots. We did lose one pilot. We used to take off before dawn on strikes. It was dark, and we'd take off. And one morning we took off through some clouds, And when we got up above the clouds, we were missing one plane. We assumed that he got vertigo and spun in because we couldn't think of any other reason. That was a pretty sad time. One of the fellows, at one time I had a war correspondent flying in the in the turret on one of the strikes. And the well-known writer Dick Tregaskis was aboard our ship for a long time. He was preparing a documentary for Life magazine. And actually the day before we lost that crew, he had flown with that plane on a strike. The war ended pretty abruptly, so that his book and the article for Life magazine never materialized. I'm trying to think of some other stories. Flying was exciting. It was a great thrill. And at that time, they assessed it at a $25,000 education, which today I think runs around $1 million at least. Of course, they have these very, very sophisticated aircraft now. We used to, our top speed, straight and level, was about 150 knots. Multiply that by 1.15 and you have miles per hour. We dropped 500-pound bombs because they determined after the Battle of Midway that torpedoes were just too dangerous because you had to fly in at low speeds and low altitude to drop them accurately. So I never dropped a torpedo except in training at Martha's Vineyard. In combat, we just dropped 400 or 500-pound bombs. At Martha's Vineyard, we dropped a couple of torpedoes that weren't cement, and they had they weren't live, and they had a ship out there that we aimed at. It was kind of fun. A couple of the torpedoes ended up on the beach, but nobody got hurt. Nobody. And, there were, I don't know, I thought it was a wonderful experience. I feel for all the men who had to fight on the ground, because we really, well, aboard ship, we didn't have to stand watches because we were the fighting arms, supposedly, so we were treated pretty royally. I hope the same thing is going on now, because it was dangerous. Flying aboard a carrier was exciting. We had contests between the carriers in the fleet to see who could land their group the fastest. Our intervals of landing, it was a contest. If we landed one plane would land in under 20 seconds after the other one. And when you landed, the first thing you did was, after the hook was released, a man would run out and release the hook. Full throttle, and right in front of you there's this barrier that you'd hit if you were flying in and you didn't get a hook. Full throttle, and they'd lay down the barrier and you'd get over the barrier and they'd put it back up for the next plane. That was exciting. We used to watch them. When we weren't flying, we used to go out and watch flight operations because it was so exciting. I can't begin to tell you what an experience it was. My mother used to tell me, fly low and slow, Johnny. Of course, the rule was be high and fast. We used to land at about 75 knots. And that's, well, a little over 80 miles an hour. It's pretty tricky. And the landing signal officer standing there, he was God. he told you what to do. Slow down, go up a little bit, speed up. But we were fortunate. There were a few landing accidents aboard the ship. I was fortunate enough not to have any, except that final one. Of course, that wasn't a landing accident. That was fate, let's say. Let's see if I can find anything else. We lost many, many pilots over the 2 or 3 years in training. That was the most dangerous part, actually, of my experience, because we did a lot of flying. I accumulated a little over 1,000 hours in the air, and the majority of it was, the great majority of it was in training. We had one field down in Pensacola that we called Bloody Barren because they lost so many trainees. I did find something interesting since I got out. There's a man in Westfield who was putting together a torpedo bomber that was pulled out of Lake Michigan. There were many of them in the bottom of Lake Michigan, many Navy planes, because that's where all the pilots had to go to qualify to land on a carrier. And he was there, and they had just pulled one out, and I don't know whether he bought it or what, but he loaded it on a trailer and brought it back home to Westfield, and I don't know how he's ever going to manage it, but he's putting it together, and right now he's got the fuselage all on, and my signature on it, as well as many other fellows that have gone through. While we were in Pensacola getting our wings, there were several Army Air Force pilots there training in these flying boats, the Catalina, the PBY, and as young squirts, we were kind of bitter. Look at these fellas come in. They learn to fly one plane, and they give them Navy wings. And they already had their Air Force wings. Well, son of a gun, one of those fellas picked us up in Tokyo Bay. So I guess it's a good thing they did some training. They had these special Army Air Force rescue squadrons manned by pilots who had trained at Pensacola with us. Oh, and while I was at Pensacola, you know what? Oh, I never did mention University of North Carolina pre-flight. How could you forget it? It was quite a grueling course, you know, with the obstacle courses and everything like that. And we had Ted Williams was in the battalion before us, and we had Johnny Pesky was in the battalion before us. I think Pesky dropped out. I'm not sure of this when they went to Bunker Hill. I don't know whether he dropped out or what the reason was. That was pretty scary. If you got washed out, you just went into the enlisted ranks because you weren't commissioned or anything. So it was quite a hurdle. It wasn't all fun and games, and it wasn't all combat. We actually went aboard we were invited aboard a British carrier when we were out there, and we had I guess it was a field hockey game or some kind of a hockey game aboard the British carrier with the British pilots. And I had to, I rode over to the Missouri one day for some reason, I can't even remember that. But it was a wonderful time. Then the war was over. Well, that was when the war was over, and the signing ceremonies were going on the Missouri. I was very lucky, very lucky. My middle name, by the way, is Fortunate. Seriously. So I guess I fell into some good luck.